Hello and welcome to this new episode of Daughters of Narcissistic Mothers podcast. I'm Matilda and I'm your host. And for all the new listeners, I am an inner transformation mentor supporting women in healing mother wounds through women's circles and through the one-on-one 10 weeks program. To know more about these offerings, you can check out my website, womenreclaimingtheirfullness.me, and you can also check all the links in the descriptions of this episode. Now, today we're diving into a topic that comes up a lot: how healing from maternal narcissism impacts your romantic relationship. This is a vast topic, and today my intention is to give you an overview as complete as possible while still general. If this sparks more specific questions within yourself, you can share with me, sending me an email at matilde@womenreclaimingtheirfullness.me. And you can ask your questions there, or you can also share in the comments. I'm going to talk about the how the healing process from our mother wounds has an impact on our relationships, our romantic relationships in specific, and why that is. And I'll also share at the end of the episode, I'll share 4 steps which have helped me in my own relationship. And I also share these always with my clients when they come to this point, and I've seen this working really, really well. So I'm going to share these 4 points with you today, and let's get started. So I want to ask you first, has the way you relate with your partner changed since you started on this journey of healing mother wounds? Have you seen differences? Have you found yourself wondering if you are with the right person after all? Have you found you're less tolerant of your partner's behaviors? Of the behaviors that don't feel as good, the behaviors that maybe are not very nice towards you. Are you feeling confused and conflicted about it all? If you're experiencing any of this, I really get it. And if you are, this can work for every kind of romantic relationship. So even if you're just with someone for a few weeks or for a few months, and you get to this point in your healing journey, you can notice differences. Now, if you are married or in a long-term relationship, this will feel magnified and even more intense. Usually also because there is more at stake. I mean, if you're married, maybe a long time, you may have a family, you may have children together. A lot gets involved into this. So, and you can get to the place where you may even start wondering if you've made the wrong choice, even marrying this person or staying with this person. I've had clients and also listeners actually reaching out with this question, sort of beginning to wonder, am I even with the right person? Why did I even get married with this person in the first place? And they start questioning. Or also maybe you might be beating yourself up for feeling like this, for feeling like you don't love them as you used to, and that healing is making you a selfish and a bad person. That can also happen, because if you remember, we have the conditioning from our mother wounds, from our narcissistic mothers, to actually always be the one that take the blame. So this mechanism can also come up of feeling like you are being selfish and you're being bad. Or maybe you started noticing similarities between your mother's toxic behavior and the way your partner treats you at times. And so you may be questioning, is my husband also a narcissist, or is my partner also a narcissist? And this specific question, this is a vast topic on its own, and it actually nearly deserves its own episode, so I'm not gonna go too much into that today. But if you have questions on that, also you can send me an email and let me know. So if any of this sounds like what you're going through at the moment, I totally get it. I've definitely been through my version of it. I'm married 16 years, and when we met, we were both highly traumatized people with zero awareness of it all, doing our best to cope with a lot of hurt. All in all, not the best basis for a healthy relationship, and we both know this now. So we both ended up taking our fair share of toxicity from the other person. And I'm sure some would say, if they were to look at our relationship back then, that it was a codependent, trauma bonded relationship and all of that. But since I started, and I'm gonna speak about my own part of this, of course my partner, my husband, also has done his own part, but I'm not gonna speak to that today. He's not here. So I'm gonna speak about my own. Since I started truly diving into the trauma I've been carrying, learning to know myself deeper and deeper, things started changing a lot. Okay, and how have they changed? I'm gonna speak about that in a moment. What I want you to know first of all is that it is natural that things will change in the way you relate with your partner during this profound healing journey you're on. Not only I experienced it myself, as I mentioned, but I see it all the time in my clients, both in the circles and in the one-on-ones. Inevitably, at some point, we get to this point when they start reconsidering their romantic partners. I've literally have had clients coming in that at the beginning of their program or at the beginning within the circle, they're not at all even thinking there's something wrong with the way they've been treated, although they do recount episodes that seem to be quite toxic and disrespectful and not pleasant to be part of. But again, there's no judgment, it's a safe space. And then the more they get to reconnect with self-love, self-respect, and they get grounded, they start going, okay, I still love this person, but there are some behaviors that are not on, and we need to talk about this. So I've seen that happening quite a bit. But this can be quite scary and confusing. And I get that. And it was for me, for sure. And it can be that scary and that confusing that you might even pull away from the healing journey. You might actually go, you know what, I've done enough. I don't want to do any more because I don't want to go dig into this aspect of my life and then make a mess and then lose everything I have. In my case, when this started really changing a few years ago, we already had children together with the family, so questioning my relationship meant questioning a huge portion of my life, actually a really important portion of my life, which I'm sure it is for many of you as well. So one of the most common questions I get is, does this mean my marriage will fall apart? Will I inevitably need to break up with this person? And of course, I can't answer that for sure universally because every situation is unique. But what I can say though is that it doesn't necessarily have to end up in a breakup. It didn't for me. And it's something I see happening extremely rarely with my clients too. Actually, what I've witnessed a lot more is breakups, and very tragic ones at that, actually very, very intense ones, among people who are not on a healing journey, because they remain in all the hurtful and toxic dynamics until they can't do it anymore, until you get to that point where even though you're not aware, even though you have no idea that is wounds, that is trauma and whatever, you actually are in those patterns, and eventually blame, shame and resentment and all of that comes to the surface, and you can't take that anymore, or things get so toxic that you need to leave quick. So the more we bring awareness and the more we're doing this work, actually the more we can implement tools and things that bring us together in a way better relationship than what it used to be when we were unaware. That has been my journey, and again, I observe this all the time with people I'm working with. Within my work, what I see happening a lot is a deep transformation within the relationship, which can definitely shake the ground for a while at times. Like, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be conflict, that there's not going to be contrast, because there's new grounds being brought in, there's new aspects being introduced. But on the long run, makes things so much better for both parts involved. And again, with this, I'm not telling you that that's a guarantee. I mean, there are going to be situations where that's not going to be the outcome. My intention is to let you know that it doesn't necessarily have to end in a breakup. It might, but it's not a sure thing. So what are the changes you can expect within yourself? Because you might actually, I want to speak to this so that if you are in that phase, you're like, okay, I can recognize this. This is exactly what's happening with me right now. Or maybe you're not there yet, but this is going to give you a chance to be prepared when this might happen. So one of the first things that starts happening is a loss of tolerance. Okay, the more you heal your trauma, the less tolerant you get to toxic and disrespectful behaviors. And I'm gonna go into the why of all of this in a minute. Okay, for now, just take it as I'm saying it. So you transform when you're coming into a relationship highly traumatized, with carrying wounds from a narcissistic mother that has conditioned you from early childhood to have no boundaries, to have no self-respect, to blame yourself for everything, to take the fault of everything, to feel like you're inherently not enough, and all of that. You're coming into a relationship having very high tolerance and very low standards, and that's not a fault. I've been there, and I meet many there all the time. That's not a fault. That's just a conditioning we've received. So there's nothing wrong with you for coming into a relationship like that. That's just how we've been conditioned, and it's a subconscious thing as well. We mightn't actually even think that we have low standards and high tolerance, but in the subconscious, that's what's going on. What happens when you heal, you start developing progressively lower tolerance as to toxic and abusive behaviors we're talking about, and higher standards. And again, we'll go into the reasons in a minute, but that's the big change. So that's what I'm talking when I'm saying loss of tolerance, where the tolerance for disrespectful, toxic, abusive behaviors becomes less and less and less, and your standards become higher because you're respecting and loving yourself more. So if you want to go deeper on this topic, I released an episode very recently, actually, episode 71. Does healing from maternal narcissism mean becoming more tolerant to abuse? That's the episode. So if you want, you can go and listen to that if you haven't already, and it might bring you deeper on this topic. So the next change that you might see is that you're less quick to surrender. So within a contrast, within a conflict moment, you are actually less quick to give up. You're less willing to be quiet and take it on the chin. So when something hurtful is said to you, or when a situation doesn't feel good for you, if before you took it and bottled it all up, maybe even feeling you deserved it, maybe you were even blaming yourself for it, as you heal your wounds, your mother wounds, you'll find yourself not taking it quietly anymore. And going, hold on a second. I know we've been together 10 years, and I know you've been treating me like this for 10 years, but this doesn't feel right anymore. I'm not taking this anymore. The third thing that can happen is you're less obsessively worried about your partner's needs, which can make you feel, as we mentioned earlier, like you are transforming into a less caring and a selfish person. I can tell you that's likely not the case. When we're conditioned to feel constantly responsible for the emotional state of our mothers, or to be faulty and unlovable and in need to perform in order to be lovable, we tend to become obsessively concerned with the needs of our partner, because if there's something wrong with that person, it's gonna come back on to us in some way, shape, or form. It's probably gonna be our fault. If he has a frown on his face, it must be something we've said. If he's a little bit upset today or nervous, it must be something we've done. No, maybe he's upset for his own reasons, or her own reasons, but we just take it. It's like it has to be me, because that's how we've been conditioned. As you heal, the more you heal, you're not gonna be as worried. you're gonna still be caring and loving if there are needs that your partner is expressing. Of course, there's nothing wrong with that. But that obsessive sort of having to observe every single little sign and take the blame for everything and wanting to fix everything before it gets into something worse, before he abandons you, before he leaves you, before inevitably something goes wrong, that's gonna go. And what a relief that is. The next thing is you're going to be more grounded in what you need and progressively more confident in expressing it all to your partner. So your needs begin to count. So you become less obsessed with every little thing that your partner might need, even when they're saying nothing. And you start feeling into your own needs, and they start becoming important too. Progressively, this gets to a place where your needs are actually of equal importance to the other person. And then the next thing is you start discovering new parts of you. This goes beyond the needs. So we said you start feeling into your needs a little bit more. Those were the needs that you knew were there, but you suppressed because you didn't deserve any joy or any good in your life because of the conditioning. And then the more you get to know yourself, you start discovering new parts of you. So needs you didn't know were there. Like these new parts of you are new in the sense that you had no idea these even existed within you. You get to discover them more and more as you get to know yourself. And so it actually can add a lot of beauty to the relationship because you're bringing new things in, you're bringing variety, you're bringing new aspects that weren't there before. But again, this can also create confusion depending on how it's taken from the other side and a lot of things. So, and I didn't mention it yet, but of course, all of this it's kind of part of all of these aspects that I mentioned. You start getting more grounded in setting your boundaries. This is kind of like an overall aspect of everything that impacts all of these 5 points that I made. Boundaries become easier for you to set, and so when there's something that you need, you say it. When there's something that you don't agree with, you say it, and you start actually just being more comfortable with where what feels right ends and where what doesn't feel so right begins for you. And you know that line, and you're like, there's no crossing that line anymore. So all these transformations are a natural part of this healing journey, and they will in some way impact the way you relate with your partner. So let's take a step back for a moment, because we said we were going to talk about the why this is all happening. So we need to remember that the wounds that we carry as a result of growing up with a narcissistic mother or narcissistic parents are relational wounds. The way she related to you, as in the way your mother related to you, the way your other parent related to you, and also the way they related with each other, whether they were together or not. My parents were divorced, and yet that was a way of relating with each other. It all impacts the way you relate with your partner. That's the model. Okay, we tend to recreate relationship dynamics we have observed and experienced growing up. Unfortunately, with particular emphasis on the aspects that have been traumatizing. Okay, this is driven by the subconscious with the purpose of unpacking the trauma of the experience and healing it. Okay, so there is a reason why this happens, but because it is all subconscious, it doesn't work. It only gets us in hurtful relationships, re-traumatizing the system over and over and over. So we tend to recreate these dynamics. We've taken that model, even though rationally we believe that there's better ways to do relationship, even though rationally we really want a different kind of relationship. I've seen the dynamics between my parents, and I've also seen a lot of other relationship dynamics in my family, and also how my mother and my father related with me, and I really didn't want to recreate any of that. So rationally you're there, But the subconscious drive is to recreate those situations, and we do it by default. And that just creates a pattern that gets re-traumatizing for the nervous system, for the system. So you start actually, it can get worse. It can spiral and get worse. We don't tend to get, unless we do some kind of work on this, we don't tend to get from one relationship into a better one. Might at the beginning seem like that, but on the long run, it tends to get worse. That has been my observation, both in my own experience and also in my client's experience. Not really, because as I said, I haven't seen many breakups, but in experiences that I've observed within my family dynamics and also within people that I know. So, and there's also statistics that show how there's a higher percentages of divorces when it's the third marriage than there would be. So I can't remember the exact numbers, but whatever amount of divorces happen in the first marriage, when there is a second one, they divorce a lot quicker and a lot more. And the third one, there's even more divorce rates. So that kind of shows you that we repeat the patterns. This is, again, with people that haven't done any work on this. That's what we're talking about. We repeat the same patterns and it gets worse. So with all that said, when you met your partner, considering that that's the subconscious drive, okay, and you have that modeling from your parents, from your narcissistic mother and all of that, you have the subconscious drive that repeats the trauma. When you met your partner, chances are you carried insecurities, you carried shame, beliefs of being unlovable or broken, or maybe inherently undeserving of joy and love unless you performed. Maybe you carried fear of abandonment and neglect, or a deep belief that love is conditional and you get it only if you meet a set of criteria. Maybe you came in with a belief that your emotions are bad and that you're too sensitive and that your voice is not deserving to be heard. Or maybe you brought in your need for approval and validation and all the conditioning you received growing up that made you believe boundaries are a bad thing and that in order to be loved you have to tend to the other's every need all the time. Or that in order to feel safe, you have to control everything. That's something else that we bring in very often. Or that in order to keep your partner with you, you need to be constantly sexually available. Or the opposite, that your sexuality is too much and you need to suppress it to be loved, and so on. So again, these may all be, you may recognize yourself and go, oh yeah, I had a lot of that. And that's a sign that you've been doing enough work to actually bring that into the awareness. But a lot of these beliefs can actually be ruling the situation from the subconscious. I had no idea I was bringing a bucket of this stuff into my relationship when I first met my husband. Now, in the years of work, I started unpacking it and go, oh, yeah, I brought a little bit of that. And I also brought in a little bit of that and a lot of that too. But at the beginning, I didn't know. So that's important to note. What I've mentioned is there, but is there in the background, is there in the subconscious. Okay, it's a conditioning that is underneath the surface. Does any of this make sense and resonate? Let me know. Yeah, share with me. It's always welcome and I love your questions. So being a daughter of a narcissistic mother, okay, chances are you brought into the relationship a lot of this that I mentioned, your version of it. And to add to the soup, your partner had their version of it too. Even if it doesn't seem they had narcissistic parents, a certain level of trauma is part of growing up in today's society, and a lot of parents, they might not fit this perfect blueprint of a narcissist, but there's pretty much inevitably there have been moments of lack of awareness emotionally, and even with the best of intentions, they've ended up doing something or saying something that has caused some level of trauma within the system of a child. Because remember, the trauma is not actually the experience in itself, but it's the lack of understanding of the experiences. And the child doesn't have a lot of that understanding in the first few years of their lives. So like something as simple as, I can't play with you because I'm working, but done and said repeatedly in a way that is not sitting down and explaining, the child takes it personally and takes it as it's his fault or her fault, and it's their problem and they're doing something bad and they're being abandoned because they're not worthy of love. And I know that this sounds really like intense, but that's just what happens in the emotional system of a child. So again, even if you're looking at your partner and you know, oh, but they had lovely parents, but there still can be trauma in the system, and we bring it all in. Okay, we're bringing it all in to the relationship. You bring your own load, they bring their own load, and it all gets mixed up together. And this lays the basis of how you relate with one another. Okay, it laid the basis at the beginning of your relationship of how you related with one another. When you start healing your wounds, those patterns that dictated your relationship come to the surface, transform, dissolve, change, and whether your partner is going through a similar journey of inner work or not, the transformation will impact your relationship. Even if it's only one person in the relationship doing the work, the impact is going to be there. So this can bring a phase of contrast and confusion and doubts and all the things that we spoke about earlier. So those changes I listed earlier start happening. The less tolerance, the less surrendering so easily, the increased confidence in your voice and in expressing your needs, the more boundaries and so on. And that is because you're not so scared of being abandoned anymore, maybe. You know, you're feeling more and more deserving of love and respect. You start knowing that your needs count too. You have a stronger connection now with your intuition and your inner knowing, and you can't suppress it anymore. You maybe don't need all that validation anymore. You know, you begin to validate yourself and so on. So again, the question remains, after all that we spoke about, will all of this bring your relationship to an end? And again, that is a possibility. You might come to realize the needs you have are now so different from before, and also you can't control and dictate how your partner will respond to your transformation, because there's two people involved and you can only do your part. You can't actually control or dictate what the other person does. And there are also cases in which the relationship was truly toxic, like to a whole other level, and now you're finally realizing it and it's safer for you to get out. So that's important. Some cases you're really unsafe, physically unsafe, emotionally unsafe, and so you begin to realize that you start feeling safe enough in yourself to actually make a change. So those are extreme cases, and this is not what I'm talking about here today. So in many cases, instead, it doesn't have to end. It doesn't have to be the end of it. This transformation doesn't have to be. In my experience, my relationship with my husband keeps getting better the more I go along this journey. And I have seen, as I said, the same happening with clients over and over again. So there are a few things to implement in order to navigate the transformation together. I want to share with you 4 points today. And I'm going to say number 4, it's actually the one that for me is the most important of it all. They're all important, but that was really like what made a massive difference for me. So these are things that have helped me in my relationship, and they have helped my clients when I shared. And I'm going to stay general, because going deep in each of these 4 points would be a full episode on its own. And also because to know the specifics, to go very, very specific, I'd have to be working with you. In that way, we can go into like the very specific of your situation. But just to give you like an overview and start supporting you. If you start implementing this, you can start seeing really big changes. So the first thing is conscious communication. Conscious communication is a big topic in itself. I just want to give you a quick intro on this. So it's the opposite of letting the subconscious drive your communication. So when we let the subconscious drive the communication, we end up saying things that we don't actually fully mean to say. We end up letting the shadow part doing the talk, and the result of that is usually very hurtful, unhelpful, keeps a conversation going, or more than a conversation, possibly a fight, going for longer than is necessary, a lot longer. um, and and it's hurtful, and it doesn't actually add anything to the situation. um, so when you speak, especially in conflict, it is important to begin to discern what is a need of yours. Okay, what actually it is that you really want to express that is important to you, because that has relevance, and that's really important for you to do. But it needs to be separated from what is the added load of your trauma, plus possibly all the resentment that you carry, which may be with the other person, that there can be undealt resentment, and also can be coming from your past way before that person even came into your life, which is often the case. So the work is to start separating these two things and actually practice to keep the communication as clean as possible to what the present situation is. I need to talk about what's happening today and now, not bring all the load, all the wounds, and all the subconscious and throwing it at you in this conversation, because that's not helpful. So the practice is to consciously own what you feel without pointing the finger at the other or blaming them, and also insulting them, saying hurtful things, which only adds more conflict. Now, again, this is a practice. It requires exercise. It requires practice. It's not something that just happened. We've done tons of this. We've practiced this for years, and still we know sometimes that there can be we call it the messy first draft, as in sometimes even though we think it's clean, there's still messy bits, and then we unpack it further. So again, it is a practice, but it can be learned, and it makes an incredible difference. And it's not, because sometimes what I get is, oh, but does that mean I'm being not true to myself? I'm not just saying everything that's coming to mind. That's not actually it. You are being true to what's really meaningful for you to express. The rest is not actually you being true to yourself. It's just a backload of shit that wants to come out. And there are places to express that. Like there are safe places, safe spaces, like your women's circle or your men's group, your therapist, places where you actually can express those things, so you can let them out and unpack them and alchemize them and move them out of your system, but in a way that's actually safe and not hurtful for your partner. So again, it's a big topic, but just to give you a little bit of an idea. The next thing is setting your boundaries. So express clearly what is not acceptable for you, even if it was something you were okay with up until now. And I know what can happen is like, oh, but I've actually been fine with this all the time, and how am I gonna tell my partner that now this thing is not okay anymore? And it can get confusing. It's okay. Own that you've changed. That you can own that ease that you had at taking everything, or that doing whatever, or that accepting whatever was actually part of your trauma, and then now that you're healing it, that is no longer acceptable to you. That's okay. And what I want to say also about this is that it often tends to follow naturally. It's not even bringing awareness to this is important, as with everything. But what I've noticed is that very often this tends to follow naturally when you start setting effective boundaries with your narcissistic mother. Because setting boundaries with our mothers is like, it's the highest mountain. So it's like when you've climbed Everest, going on a small little hill walk, it's not actually such a big deal. Okay, so when you are able to set boundaries with your mother, it's setting boundaries with your partner is going to be a lot easier. So it kind of starts happening naturally as a byproduct of the other work. But still, awareness is important, and you can consciously do it. You can bring more awareness to it and do it consciously. The third point is become aware of the compulsive repetition patterns and the subconscious pull to continue the cycle of pain. So we touched on it earlier. We come into the relationship with dynamics and we tend to repeat the same dynamics that traumatized us, that caused us trauma growing up. This is defined as compulsive repetition or trauma reenactment, and it's a subconscious thing that we do so that we can heal and unpack the trauma. But again, as I said, because it's subconscious, that doesn't actually work. So also what can happen is that sometimes when things get better, so you're actually beginning to have a good maybe not a good relationship with your mother, I don't know, but you're starting to feel better with yourself. You're starting to unpack the relationship with your mother in a way that you are actually feeling better within yourself. The traumatized system wants to recreate the familiarity of the cycle of pain. The new joy, the new happiness, the new ease in the system, it's like something foreign because we've never experienced it before. What we've experienced was pain and hurt all the time. And that, although it's horrible, and I get that, to the system feels familiar. Without going into the physiology, there's actually proper hormones being released and substances being released in the system that create like an internal addiction to the drama because of that. But without going into that, so what happens when we are wanting subconsciously, we're needing the familiarity of conflict, we may end up projecting this onto our partner. So things are finally getting better, you're feeling better, you're dealing with your mother better, maybe you've got no contact, she's not in your life, so you are actually beginning to reclaim your life and feel better, all of that. And now all of a sudden you notice that things start going to crap with your partner kind of situation. So, and again, this doesn't mean, it doesn't contradict the other stuff. So it doesn't mean that there aren't things maybe with your partner that you need to address within your relationship. It doesn't mean, it doesn't invalidate all the rest, but it's to be aware of this mechanism, because being aware of it can help you not to add unnecessary ingredients to the soup, if that makes sense. And again, if you have any questions, I know, again, all these topics are big and I'm just giving you like a little moment, a little introduction to each. So if you have more questions, reach out and let me know. So now, point number 4, which I said was the most important point. Okay, this comes from something I see very often. And I also ended up doing myself for a time with tragic results. When we get on this journey of healing and self-discovery, we may start looking at our partner very judgmentally, projecting onto them all that we're beginning to see in our mother. All of a sudden, we find a million faults with them. And we either get repulsed or we might decide that we're going to fix them. The two things can happen. You might want to just break away from this person and that's it, and so contrast, fights, conflict until you break up, or you might decide that you are the savior and that you're going to fix them and you want them to do and implement all the things that you're doing and implementing. And I get that the intention can be really noble, but it doesn't actually work because we're all unique people and things that you may have implemented are not actually suitable for your partner, and he or she would need to implement different things. So this gets very intense very quickly and it's not very helpful, especially if you desire to actually keep the relationship. So, and again, this doesn't invalidate that there are changes happening and that there may be aspects of your relationship that you don't like anymore. And of course, there may be aspects of your partner's behavior that you don't accept anymore. So this point doesn't invalidate all that. That's all valid. It's only the way we're going about it that is not very helpful. So the trick is to move the focus away from the other person. Okay, it's not like 100% focused on how he or she is as a person, but place it on the dynamics. Place your focus on the dynamics and patterns of the two of you relating to one another. So you're not trying to work on the other person and fix the other person. You are together working, or you're doing your part, and of course you're gonna you're gonna ask the other person to come on board with this. You're working on the relationship, on person A and person B interacting with one another, not on what person B is doing wrong. Can you get the difference? Can you get how one can really be unhelpful and the other one can actually be transformative in a very beautiful way? So as I mentioned, you came into the relationship with low standards and high tolerance in order to be loved. Now your tolerance to BS is reducing and your standards are higher. So how does that change the dynamics in your relationship? Where in your relating was your trauma leading the dance? These are the questions you want to start asking yourself and bring it to the table with your partner. What dynamics, what patterns were dictated by your trauma? And possibly by your partner's trauma, of course. That their stuff can come into the conversation as well. That depends, again, on the levels of awareness and the level of work and whatever. How did your partner's baggage of wounds and yours played with one another? What can you do different when you catch a pattern? So when you see that you are stepping or falling back into that unhelpful, unhealthy pattern, what can you do different? Or usually when he said this thing, I know that was for myself, I know very well, when there were certain things that my partner would say to me, my husband would say to me that would trigger certain reaction in me, and also the opposite happened. But we could start working, okay, so when you say things like that, this is how I usually react and this isn't working. So I need to do something different here. And of course, maybe you need to start expressing these things differently. But this was part of a conversation that focused on the dynamic of the relationship, not on the other person doing it wrong. We weren't invalidating either reaction. None of us was wrong or bad for how we reacted or said things, but there was clearly a dynamic that wasn't working. And that's where we focused on. So the more awareness you bring to this dance, the more healing you can access together. And mother wounds being relational wounds, there is a lot of healing that can happen within a relationship if it's done consciously. If it's unconscious, then it's a disaster. But if it's done consciously, there's a lot of healing that can happen within the relationship. So to wrap it all up, because this was a big episode, a final point to make at the end of this episode is keep going with your potent inner journey, okay? Not to fix yourself, but to keep your system in a state of grounded ease and balance, and to keep laying strong foundations for your personal expansion and for your relationships to get more profound. And remember, as well as you don't have to do this alone as a person, you also don't have to do this alone as a couple, okay? Finding a safe space for each individual within the relationship is essential. So like your women's circle, your men's group, your mentor, your therapist that is personal to you, that is that's your journey, that's your space for you. That's where you get to get messy in a safe way without hurting the other person. It's it's your space. And then also this can be combined very effectively with another safe container where both of you together can go and sort of help within communicating with one another, with studying the dynamics of your relationship together, and start healing that unit that is your relationship. And again, if your intention is to make the relationship stronger and more profound, and that is what feels good with you, remember that you're not trying to heal or fix the other person, but you're healing the relationship through your own healing journey together. And with that, I'm gonna stop here. Again, it was a big topic. There was a lot that we spoke about and covered today. I really hope this was helpful, and I actually really hope it did spark a lot of more specific questions, because this is what happens when we bring in a topic. Then this can start like a snowball effect of, whoa, but I want to know more about this. I actually have this specific situation, I have this case, and what do I do, and whatever. So if any of this has come up for you, please don't hesitate to reach out, send me an email at matilde@womenreclaimingtheirfullness.me. The email address is in the description of the episode, as well as all the other links that you might need if you want to contact me or work with me. And also there's always the free self-love guided practice that is it's available. You can access that free, and that is always a good foundation, because the more you love yourself, the more you get in touch with that part of you, the more then everything transforms. So it's always a good starting point. So yeah, with that, I wish you lots of love, and bye for now.